So you've been using small groups as your discipleship model. You've been using small groups to run some sort of discipleship class, some sort of discipleship book. You've been trying to use small groups to supplement what we've done away with years ago in our Sunday school classes. Well, what I want to do today is I want to take the argument that I think Sunday school is, or that small groups is not a great replacement for Sunday school and not a great model for discipleship. I'm going to take that argument that I did a few weeks ago, and I'm going to invite a guest in. Well, he's not really a guest because he's been here quite a bit, but I'm going to invite Pastor Matt in, and we are going to sit down and we're going to argue whether or not small groups are a great discipleship model. So the gloves are going to come on, the bell is going to ring, and we're going to see how this argument goes and where we end at the end of the day. So get ready, because we're about to dive in. So the big question is this: how do pastors like us, who remain focused on the mission of Jesus and serving our communities without being distracted by everything in the world around us, how do we increase our effectiveness while living a lifestyle that doesn't compromise our health, our families, or our personal relationships with Jesus? That's the question this podcast is going to answer. I'm Dr. Brandon Party Cooper, and welcome to the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Welcome to this episode of the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Hope you're doing wonderfully wherever you are and whatever it is you're doing. Our goal here is to help you live your dream life in ministry, whatever that looks like, whether it's traveling around the world while you pastor a growing church, whether it's spending time with your family, your friends, whether it's having a hobby. At the end of the day, we want you to fulfill what God's called you to do, pastor a growing church, a growing ministry, but at the same time, live a life that's healthy, live a life that's fulfilling, and live a life that's an example to the world of what God can do through you in your obedience to Him. So hope you're doing well. I hope you're on your way to living that dream life. I'm excited about today's episode. A few weeks ago, I did an episode 147, why I think small groups are not a great discipleship model. Well, I think I made a pretty good case. I think I presented some pretty good reasons. But today, we're going to bring in Pastor Matt, who's been our guest over the last few weeks. He's become a regular here on the show. I'm going to invite him back because he has some thoughts, he has some ideas, and he wants to go toe-to-toe with me. And we're going to argue whether or not small groups really are a great discipleship model or whether I'm just blowing smoke and I'm delusional. So why don't you welcome Pastor Matt into the episode. Welcome, Matt.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me on. I'm very excited to convince you that you're wrong. Like, that's one of my favorite things to do. And so it's a great way.
You're still trying to convince me I'm wrong. I don't think you've actually.
I'm working on it.
So.
I'm working on it. One of these days.
So this might be history making right here.
Yes, exactly. Write down the date.
Okay, so a few weeks ago, I did an episode 147, why I think small groups are not a great discipleship model. I laid out three, what I would consider pretty convincing reasons, and it's just three, not all of my reasons, but just three. However, you've been in ministry for a long time. You've done lots of different models of ministry, whether it's youth ministry or whether it's adult ministry. You've done lots of different elements. You currently are over small groups and in kind of that world. And so you have some thoughts that are maybe counter to what I have maybe said or what I think. And so what I want to do is I want to start off by just giving you the floor. And I want you to explain why you think small groups are a viable model for discipleship. So I'm going to turn it over to you, and we'll get the show started.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to this. But small groups are the best. Small groups are the way of making the big small. One of the things that I always love to talk about in our small groups and even with our small group leaders is that a lot of times on Sunday mornings, for us at least, our small group curriculum is based off of Sunday mornings. So it's a little bit deeper of a dive into whatever we talked about on Sunday. And I always make the comparison, you might be hearing something from the communicator, the pastor that day, and you want to raise your hand and be like, well, what did you mean by that? Or, well, what about in this case? But you can't do that in Sunday. People would look at you funny. It would be very awkward. But in a small group, you're able to do that. In a small group, you're able to have those conversations with people that you are living life alongside, and you are able to dive deeper into what God is kind of working in your life. So, I mean, there are always going to be flaws with any system that we have. But at the same time, I truly believe that small groups is the best course of discipleship, kind of the best tool in our toolbox that we have to be able to make disciples, to get people from, the idea of rows to circles, the idea of taking this big idea of people just coming into church, absorbing information, and then leaving. But then how do they digest that information? How do they process that information? And I think that small groups, meeting in people's homes and having relationship with people where you can be vulnerable and talk is a great way to do that. Like I said, it's not perfect, but I think that it's probably the best way that we have. But
Yeah, and I think I would agree with that. Like I will tip my hat to that because I think you're right. I think that, when we made the decision over the last 2 decades, when we made the decision to move away from Sunday school, I still think that's the right answer. And I know there are some churches out there still doing Sunday school well. Some are hanging on to it and it's not going well. But I think that for the most part, as churches, as we moved away from Sunday school, I think that was the right answer because in most churches, Sunday school was not an effective ministry. However, I think that small groups, yes, is probably the best tool in our tool belt, but I think it's because our tool belt's very thin. We don't have a lot of tools to work with. And I
Mhm.
think that that's really kind of what I'm pushing towards is we're at a time where we need to figure that out. And again, anybody who has listened to the podcast or read any of the articles know that my push right now is I believe the next phase of discipleship is moving into more of an online model where you're doing the information transmission from teacher to student when that part is happening online. Discussion and gathering is happening in what may dare say a small group, but it's systematic and it's planned and it's a little more developed than just a small group. So I would agree that that tool, as far as the best tool out there right now, yes, I think that's true. But I also think that small groups, because they are designed for relationships, I'm not sure that they can be effective for discipleship just at the very core of their design.
Now, my question with that too is, uh, I mean, we've had discussions about this too. So, is your thought process not necessarily like that we should do away with small groups, but if we're using small groups as this tool of discipleship? So, there are positives with small groups, whether that's community, whether that's relationship, all that sort of stuff. You're just saying that when people slap on, how are you discipling people? Well, we send them to small groups and then say, now we have disciples and now we are making disciples and discipling. That's just not enough, that's not effective. Is that kind of like the thought process?
Yeah, I think that in order to have effective discipleship, I think you have to have some sort of process. You have to move people through this. Even when we look at Scripture, and I know that we have. We look at the Gospels and we look at Jesus, and we look at his disciples. What we see is what to us probably seems like a very organic, very unplanned, very natural process. Jesus is walking along doing ministry, and he's just kind of picking from the tree these nuggets of truth and giving all of these wisdom and words of insight and teaching about God and the kingdom of heaven. It feels very natural. It feels very organic. It feels like the whole, take someone with you, like that whole idea.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if we step back a little bit further, a couple layers back, we understand that Jesus and the disciples also grew up. They're very familiar with the systematic training and development of what a disciple is. They're both in the Jewish community. They have a whole history that they're familiar with. They both, Jesus and disciples, understand what this looks like from a systematic, planned, intentional, ideal way. And so even though from our perspective it looks very organic, there's really a intentionality and a systematic process going through, even at the point where Jesus sends them out. He's gone through kind of, discipleship 101, and now he's like, okay, here's your first test. We're going to send you out and see how you do. That's intentional. There's a very intentional process going on. And I think with small groups, we don't have that. Maybe we
Yeah.
have, maybe we have a book that we're going through, or maybe we have somebody who really can disciple through. But I think part of the problem is even if there's a systematic element to small groups, commitment level to small groups is low. And so you
Hmm.
don't get people going through committed to a small group because in their mind, oh, this is a small group. And so I just think there's a systematic breakdown
Yeah.
that small groups have a place. Absolutely. I don't think we do away with small groups. But I think if we're saying, hey, our discipleship model is small groups, I think it's contributing to the biblical illiteracy problem that we're having across Christian churches.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good, point to make is I think that, it's sort of like we're sending someone to college without ever going to elementary, middle school, high school kind of a thing. I think that, yeah, we often do forget that, whether it was Jewish culture or becoming a rabbi or whatever training they were going through, that there was a systematic approach to get people to where they were. And I think that, yeah, small groups oftentimes does falter on that. I think because, like you said, commitment level is typically low in small groups because we lean so heavy on the relational side. But at the same time, I guess my thought process is, so you were talking about doing like an online sort of a thing. So are you seeing this almost as two different spheres that you almost have, for lack of a better term, let's just call it online Sunday school,
Mm-hmm.
where maybe it's not happening on Sunday, but you have like a, level one, level two, level three kind of a progression that people are working towards. And then you also have small groups where people can just socialize and maybe kind of do some surface level kind of, hey, what do you think about the message? Or, hey, let's go through a book together, that sort of thing. But that's separate from the step one, step two, step three sort of thing. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the way I imagine it, because I think that, so let's say you create a Sunday class, and you don't call it Sunday school, it's just a class that happens, in the off service. You have first service and then you have second service and you have this class going on during one of them. Well, that's just a redesigned Sunday school. Or even if you have a class on Sunday night or a class on Wednesday, like the problem is, and the reason Sunday school stopped working is because people are just busy. And we can argue,
Mm-hmm.
whether or not they make, time for church or not. Like we can have that argument. But at the end of the day, as church leaders, as pastors, ministry leaders, what we have to do is we have to create systems that work for people to move them into a deeper level of spiritual growth to where they say, you know what, I don't care what my busyness looks like. I'm going to make church a priority.
Mm-hmm.
On the front end, without discipleship, that usually doesn't happen. So, what I think needs to happen is instead of creating this very time oriented process that people have to go through, people consume content all week long, constantly. I mean, people go to bed at 10:30 and they're on their phone till 12 just watching videos and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I think, you move the information transfer, that talking head style of discipleship where the person's up there and they're teaching the class. Let's take that out of the classroom, put it onto an online platform, let people go through that part on their own when it's convenient for them, make it engaging, make it something that they're wanting to engage with, make the video short, whatever. But then you move them into a discussion setup, a small group feel environment where, maybe that's every other week, maybe it's once a month, but they come together and then the conversation is had. Questions are asked. Hey, I didn't really understand this. Hey, what did this really mean? Or hey, I see this, but what about this thing over here? Those conversations are a lot more fruitful with the video, discipleship piece, information transfer in the background. They come into that room with questions and ideas. And if they miss that, so let's say they don't come for the discussion part, it's fine. They're going to miss out on a piece of that. But at
Mm-hmm.
least they're going through the discipleship information transfer portion of the process. And so you're at least moving them through with, understanding, biblical stories and understanding the, basic theology and those types of things. You're creating that in them, whether they come to the discussion or not.
So, do you have any worries though about like the relational glue that I kind of feel might be missing in that? Now, and the answer might be no. The answer might be, well, the goal is for them to be, we're combating, like you were kind of saying, biblical literacy, and that's sort of the problem that we're trying to solve.
Right.
That people genuinely know what it is to be a follower of Christ. They know Scripture, and so, they can go and get community and they can get relationship in a small group or in a different thing. But, the problem we're trying to solve right now is discipleship. And so that's not as big of a thing, because my thought process is like, are people going to want to consume that information or attend that class if they kind of feel like they're doing it alone? Are they going to have that self drive, which maybe they do, but I think that would be, that would be one of my worries. Is I feel like one of the pros of small groups is almost kind of a bait and switch, that, hey, you're coming for the food, you're coming so that your kids have other kids to play with, and that you have people that you can connect with and relate with, and be at someone's home and all that sort of stuff. And then also, while you're here, let's learn a little bit more of how to be like Jesus. And so my worry is that if we don't use small groups as that discipleship sort of like on ramp, or that discipleship vein, is that people will say, well, I don't want to just learn information.
Right.
And so that would be my kind of pro small group approach, is that if maybe there's a blending of this, or that's a definite win for small groups in my mind, is the fact that relational stickiness makes it more likely that someone's going to participate, engage, versus if it is something that is strictly informational. Even though I do believe that informational stuff is very lacking and we need it. I guess, how would you deal with that tension if you're going to kind of eliminate that relational stickiness?
Yeah, and again, this goes back, for me, it goes back to the idea that small groups are designed for relationships first. And so, and you and I both know, we've been to enough small groups, especially when you have a good small group, a really good, close relationship group. What usually falls by the wayside? Is it the relational time, or is it the teaching, discussion, conversation time? Usually, because small groups are designed for relationships, it's usually if the relational conversations are going and people are enjoying hanging out, usually we just kind of let that go, and the teaching gets shorter and shorter. And I know for me, like most of the small groups that I've been a part of, they've been basketball small groups, things like that. But usually the spiritual discipleship element is almost non-existent.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I'm okay with that, because I think that's what small groups should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also why you don't want to create a discipleship system where they're meeting every Sunday or every Wednesday or whatever. They're meeting every week to get information transferred, to get the talking head, because people's time is very valuable and they don't have a lot of it. So in my mind, consume the content on your own free time. Meet once a month to move forward in your discipleship experience. Be a part of a small group so you're getting that relational connection to the church as a whole. And if you're doing a good job of managing this discipleship experience, the people going through it are connecting with the other people in it. And so even when they walk into that once a month meeting and have that conversation, maybe there's a couple faces in the room that they're not familiar with, or maybe are new to the discipleship experience they haven't really met with. But for the most part, everybody's going through it together. And I also think it can't be just, here's 5 videos, you watch them in a week, you come to the conversation, and you're done. That's, I think, part of the problem is that the process of discipleship is too short. And so we're not taking people in depth. We're not taking them deeper, than just simply, Christianity 101. Here's your, 5 pillars of what it looks like to be a Christian. Here's your certificate. Now be on your way, be a part of small groups. I think that it needs to be longer. And, to really disciple, honestly, Jesus took 3 years to disciple his disciples. Now, I'm not saying we need to take 3 years, but I think we could easily take 3 years. We could easily be moving people through different levels of discipleship over a long period of time. And I think as long as it's engaging, people will be connected with the people they're in it with, and quite honestly will encourage them. I know for me, there have been a couple small group discipleship experiences that I've oversaw and taught. And I'm thinking of one class in particular. They started at level 1 and they moved on to level 2, and they could drop out at any point. But this particular group, they were so tied together and they were so in it together that there were a couple of people who were like, we got to level 3 and they were like, I don't think I want to keep doing this. I'm not really sure I can keep doing it. And the group was like, man, don't quit now. Like, stay with us. Let's work it together. Let's keep going. And that group, for 2 guys in particular, it was the group that got them through. Those two
Hmm.
guys would have never made it had the group not rallied around them and carried them through. And
Yeah.
so I think that if it's designed well, you can definitely build in a relational element. I just think that as pastors and ministry leaders, we have to remember that the discipleship is the focus. Relationship can be a byproduct, but discipleship and moving people through the process and exposing them to the necessary information, that has to be the focus.
So, when we're talking specifically about discipleship, is there a worry in your mind that like there is a completion level to it? I know one positive about small group is ideally like because of the relational stickiness or whatever you want to call it, that like this is sort of like your kids grow together and you grow together and you create these bonds, which means you continue to come, you continue to learn, that sort of thing. So is there a worry in the discipleship process that, like, let's say, I'm just throwing numbers out here, let's say it's a 5 level thing. If you're flying through it, you can do one of them a month, that someone who's determined and is watching the videos, attending every time, they don't miss a single time, they're done in 6 months.
Yep.
And then like, they get their, golden star, I am a disciple, and then they're done though. uh I guess, is there a worry, because I think one of the things, whether we admit it or not, at churches we like numbers, we like people staying connected, all that sort of stuff. And so is there a worry that, unlike small groups where there's never a reason not to be in a small group, whether you're
Right.
20 or you're 80, everyone can be in a small group, versus this, there is a definite timeline, even if it takes you 5 months or if it takes you 5 years, at some point you're going to end
Mhm.
with the curriculum or that sort of process. And then it's like, okay, I am now a disciple and I'm good to go. I guess, how would you counteract that with the small group of there's continually always something, just the same as Sundays? Like there's always another Sunday, there's always another small group. But
Right.
with this, since there is a, packaged get
Mhm.
together sort of thing, how would you counteract that for pastors who are saying, well, I can always point someone to small group. Like
Right.
they're never going to come up to me and say, "Well, I already did that, and
Mhm.
so now what do I do?"
Right. I think yes and no. That's not a great answer, I know, but because the way I look at it is yes, you're right. So let's just go with 5 levels, and let's say it takes you a year to get through each level. Again, in my mind, they're a part of small groups still as well. They're not
Hmm.
isolated to the discipleship experience. Now they could be, but I think that even going through the discipleship experience, they are going to feel this draw to be a part of small groups, especially if you have created an engaging atmosphere at church. I know, like for us, the church that we attend, there's always some great things going on. And so for us, it's like, we are a part of this discipleship experience. We're going through this leadership training, whatever, but we still want to be a part of these small groups that are doing all these fun things and connecting and whatever. They're creating community. So we want both. We're a part of both of those.
Hmm.
And I think that there has to be, not only does there have to be an end point, but I think there also has to be breaks in between. So let's say you go through level
Hmm.
one and now you have to wait 6 months to then go to level two. And it's not because you need a break. It's because you need to apply what you just learned. You need
Mm.
time to make that a part of your lifestyle. You need it because again, we're not the goal. And I know you're right. As church leaders, we get mesmerized by numbers, but I think our desire to grow numbers is what's failed us to grow people. We're so
Hmm.
focused on getting bodies that we're not really developing people in discipleship. And I think
Hmm.
that numbers, I mean, you know me, I'm a data guy. Like I will collect data on every possible thing we can to see where we are. But at the same time, that can't be what drives our decisions.
Yeah.
Deeper disciples have to draw our decisions. And so, so yes, does that mean that eventually they come out of the process? Sure, it does. But I would hope that through the course of going through the discipleship process, they are connecting in small groups and other elements. And so so when they come to a completion point, it's a celebration. Like, man alive,
Hmm.
you've done this. Like you've gone through this whole process. Great job. Obviously you haven't arrived because none of us ever do, but we're so excited. And now there's the next thing. There's leadership, or there's volunteer training, or there's, maybe it's, moving towards being on the board, whatever that next step is. And, here with Ministry Hackers, we have a whole process to go through 8 different levels of experiences at church. But I think that there's always something next.
Hmm.
But I think once you have that strong discipleship foundation, that Christian foundation, that you understand the Bible, you understand the stories that you should, you understand the theology. Once that's created, now I'm not just, discipleship isn't just about what I'm getting. Discipleship
Mm-hmm.
now becomes what I'm giving, whether it's as a volunteer, as a leader. That's the next phase. And that's even, even what we see with Jesus getting to the point where he sends out, the disciples. He says, now go in pairs of two and go do this thing, because you've reached a point where you're not just getting. Now you have to learn how to give. You have to learn how to serve. You have to learn how to train others to do the same. And I think at church, in our churches, we don't do that really well. We get
Yeah.
people to volunteer really well. Well, really well is
Hmm.
very relative. But that's what we're good at, moving people into volunteerism. But I don't think we're really good at moving people into disciple making. And I think that's the next phase. And I think that's also what's contributed to too many Christians, too many churchgoers, too many people who sit in the pew Sunday after Sunday and really don't get deeper and grow in their relationship with Jesus, because we haven't taught them how to be disciple makers. We've just taught
Mm-hmm.
them how to sit in class and learn information and be relational, but
Yeah.
haven't taught them how to take those two things and put them together.
Yeah. So another counterpoint is, well, I don't want to say that they're easy, but small groups seem like they'd be easier than what you're recommending. And so if I'm a pastor listening to this idea, even if I want disciples, because I do think that, like, I think if you give me 10 sold out followers of Christ over 100 church attenders, I'm going to make a bigger impact to my community. I'm going to do, like, know what I mean? So I get that when you're like, it's not just necessarily about, hey, can we get everyone plugged into something?
Right.
But at the same time, like, how one of the easiest things for small groups, one of the great wins of small group, is it's the same thing as a Sunday. You can always invite someone to a Sunday because there's going to be a Sunday. Like, I don't need to think, oh, are we having church on Sunday? Like, there's always a Sunday. And so same thing with small group. Like, okay, where do you live, or whatever, or however you do small groups, whether they're interest based or stage of life or location based, or whatever you do small groups as, there's always kind of an on ramp that you can just say, okay, well, just go to this house or do this thing or whatever. Is there, what would you say to somebody who is a pastor and would say, okay, well, does that mean I need to have like a level 1 instructor, a level 2 instructor? What if somebody like joins, but we just had the level 1 class, and, like, know what I mean? So I guess, once again, I'm not saying that we should always lean towards, well, it's easier to do it this way.
Right.
But how would you, I guess, say the value is higher to kind of counteract the extra work or the extra input or building that's going to take, versus, hey, here's a small group in your area, just go to that small group?
Right. Yeah, and I feel this 100%. So as an executive pastor for 6 years, I think it was year 2 that I developed a 7-week discipleship experience, and it was kind of first steps class. We went through the whole thing in 7 weeks, week after week after week. Well, I loved the content. I wrote the content. I designed the whole thing. I loved it. But quite honestly, by like year 3, doing 7-week cycles over and over and over and over again, like, I just got tired of teaching it. It was just exhausting to teach, because every week it was like, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? Oh, we reached we reached week 7. Great. We're going to take 1 week off. We'll come right back. We'll start week 1. We're going to do the whole thing over again. And it was great for those going through it. But for me as a teacher, it was tiring, because it was just the same thing over and over again. I think sometimes we, as pastors and ministry leaders, we forget to create systems that work for us. And I think that's where the online piece becomes so valuable. Because I know for me as a pastor, if I can sit down and I can, let's say level 1 is 10 videos. That's a lot, but it doesn't have, whatever. It's 10 videos. I sit down over the course of a couple months and I shoot those 10 videos. I get the content ready. I shoot the videos, prepared, done. It takes me 2 months to do. Well, you know what? I never have to do that again. It's not like theology is going through major changes in 5 years. It's not like the biblical stories are going to go through any changes. Like, I can shoot those videos and use them till I'm 80 if I want. That work is done and packaged and ready to go. And I can do that for every single level, every single thing that I'm wanting to do in the discipleship experience. I can do it once and be done with it. And so, yes, I think small groups are easier, but quite honestly, for me, if I have a meeting once a month where I get to walk in the room and I get to sit down with all the people going through discipleship and I get to ask the question, So, what have you learned over this last month in your discipleship experience? And all I do from that point on is facilitate conversation and field questions.
Mm-hmm.
That's super easy for me. I would much rather do that than come and teach a class week after week after week. And so yes, I think it is easier. It seems easier to do small groups, to just send people there. Now, what I would also say is that small groups. So if you have somebody that comes into the church, they're brand new to church, they've never been to church before, they come into church. Most likely, if you have a great culture in your church, most likely what's going to happen is either that person's going to say, hey, how do I get connected here? And somebody's going to say, oh, small groups, or somebody's just going to meet them and say, hey, I'd love for you to, come and check out my small group. That's going to happen naturally. But
Mm-hmm.
most people, new believers, unchurched people, or even a lot of veteran believers who are just coming to your church new, most of them are going to say, hey, where's your discipleship class? I want to be a part of that. So if every Sunday morning that's the thing you're pushing, hey, if you're
Mm-hmm.
new here, if you're brand new here at ABC Church, we would love for you to step into our First Steps, discipleship class or whatever you want to call it, and to learn about who we are, what exactly you're getting into by attending, and how we can serve you. Man, I think that when you're pushing that every week, even if it's just a quick blurb every week, but you're communicating that this is important. Your discipleship is important to us here at ABC Church, and we want to make sure we get you off on the right foot. People
Yeah.
are going to naturally find small groups. What you're promoting should be more your discipleship classes. And there are ways to make that whole process a lot easier. Is it hard? Is there some work on the front end? Sure. But once it's done, it's done. You don't have to go back and do it again.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because I think that, yeah, and I think that's a really good selling point for pastors because I'm picturing, I know there are people who listen to this podcast that are like, hey, that's great for the church of 2,000 people with 50 staff members and 300 volunteers, but like it's me, my wife, and that one guy who like volunteers, and he's not that great of a volunteer. And so yeah, that really does make sense. Like the fact that, yeah, there's work on the front end, but like once it's done, it's done. And so I think that is really encouraging to pastors who might be thinking about doing this switch and not the whole, okay, let's throw out small groups entirely.
Right.
But when we're saying, how are you discipling people? Like, don't just say we send them to someone's house and then they talk.
Right.
But yeah, okay, that makes sense. I think that, I mean, you make some good points, and I think that, coming into this conversation, I think a good clarifying thing with some tension when you say, hey, I don't think that small groups are a good way of discipling. I think that, that's naturally aggravating for people because some people listening might be, exactly. You sometimes just like to rub people the wrong way just because. But I think because some people are thinking like, well, I'm a small groups pastor, or I've seen such great life change in small groups, or, I could tell you a million stories of how small groups have changed people's lives, all that sort of stuff. And that's one thing in ministry that I've really kind of had to adapt to is at 242, we call it, killing the golden calf. The idea of something has worked really well. And just because something has worked well or might appear to be working well because numerically people are showing up to it, is it doing what we want it to do? Right. And so I think that coming out of this conversation, this could be a really good challenge for people who even are small group pastors where, okay, like if we are saying that small groups are making disciples, are they really doing that? Mm-hmm. Or is that sort of like just sort of the funnel, in the org chart when we have the discipleship tile, like, are we just saying, okay, it fits better in small groups than it does on Sunday mornings, so let's put it under there? Yeah. Or are we, and then I think this could also be really good for small groups because then maybe that is a meaty, like something that's almost weighing down small groups, like where maybe small groups should just be the more relational, connectional, I think so. Living life alongside of people. Because I know like one of the jokes in our small group is like we do the icebreaker 45 minutes in. Right. Because we're just spending so much time like, hey, like, how's your kid? How is that work thing? How's your mom doing? Is she doing better? So much of those conversations are happening that by the time that we get to the spiritual meat of the lesson, right, then like it's sort of like the footnote. Yeah. And so So yeah, so I think this could also be encouraging for people who are passionate about small groups, that maybe this could even be a refining of, hey, let's do small groups better, and what do we really want small
Mm,
groups to accomplish?
yeah.
And if it is discipleship, okay, let's maybe lean into that a little bit more. But if it's not, then hey, we can lean into the relational side, and then because we know they're doing the discipleship somewhere else.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I think that especially for if you are a small group pastor, or let's say you're a lead pastor and you're trying to navigate a transition to what we're talking about, I think you can put it under the guise of small groups. Hey, we have a once a month small group that's
Mm-hmm.
going deep into scripture, and associated with that are these videos, this video series that you go through. And you can, you don't have to make it a discipleship class. I think that's part of it is we have to think, how do we make it more palatable and more inviting for people to get into? I think at the end of the day, our number one job is to go and make disciples. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that what we've learned over the last 3 or 4 years is that we're not doing a great job of that. And I think that, like
Yeah.
I said at the beginning, we're using the best tools that we can. And I think that's a huge red flag that, okay, the best tools that we can use right now are not working. So we need to
Mm-hmm.
figure out a new tool or a new approach or a new way of doing it. And I think that everything is moving online. People are getting busier and busier. And so, in order to kind of, massage those two issues, I think that some sort of online discipleship experience with a live element kind of ticks all the boxes and does what we need it to do. So, well, Matt, I appreciate the counterpoints. I appreciate you kind of sticking in there with me, and
Yeah. It's always fun.
at the end of the day, I think you've helped me understand that even though I've known that small groups are valuable, I think my push against small groups has become so strong because of my desire for discipleship to get better. I think you've helped me understand like small groups and discipleship can coexist with each other. It's just that we have to find a way to focus discipleship a little bit stronger and create a tool that works for discipleship a little bit better than what we have, but still
Mm-hmm.
valuing what small groups bring. Because at the same time, over the last decade or so, small groups has been kind of the go-to thing that's really helped churches grow and develop, and for some churches save them as they
Mm-hmm.
move away from Sunday school. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's always good to argue with you.
Yeah,
Good points, counterpoints. I
yeah.
love it.
We'll have to find something else to argue about in the future.
Oh, I'm sure we'll find something.
All right. Well, Matt, you have to go. Thank you so much for being here. And so at this point, we will say, see you later.
All right, bye.
All right. And for us, as we come to a close, as we shut things down in this episode, thank you so much for being here. I hope this was a helpful conversation. And even though we're having a little fun with the argument piece, I think that it's a conversation that you need to continue to have. Take it to prayer, spend time with God about it, spend some time with your staff, maybe your board, but figure out how you can switch up what you're doing, how you can change the model, how you can change the delivery, whatever it is that you can do to make discipleship, at the forefront of what you're doing in ministry. Make it first and foremost, and really help your people, your congregation, go deeper in their relationship with Jesus. And it's one of the things that we are very passionate about here at Ministry Hackers. One of the things that we work on is helping churches to navigate those waters, how to create the systems, how to create the online experiences, and to integrate that with their websites and all of that. And so there's ways to do it, and we would be happy to help if that's something that you're interested in doing. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being a part of this podcast. Thank you for joining us week after week. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll see you in the next episode.